The Titanic was a massive ocean liner ship that set sail from Southampton, England to New York City across the Atlantic Ocean on April 10th. At the time, the Titanic was the biggest ship in the world, being 882.5 feet long and 92.5 feet wide. This ship was a luxury British cruise liner from the White Star Line that held roughly 2,200 passengers on its first and only trip. Most passengers on board were very wealthy, and the ship was nicknamed the Millionaire Special. The captain of the ship was Edward J. Smith, who was a 62-year-old popular, wealthy man. Looking at the timeline for the voyage, the Titanic was safely able to travel to Cherbourg, France, and Cobh, Ireland on April 11th for its stops, but had issues on its way to New York City. However, on April 14th, the radio operators had received warning signals about some icebergs ahead. Captain Edward decided to slightly change the ship's course more south and maintain the ship's speed at 22 knots. Around 9:40 p.m., there was a warning sent to the ship about an ice field, but this message never reached on board. At 10:55 p.m., the ship had stopped after being surrounded by ice, and at roughly 11:40 p.m., there had been icebergs spotted nearby. Spotting icebergs were not very easy at the time because it was nighttime and the waters were very calm. The ship was ordered to turn left to immediately avoid collision, but unfortunately, the ship had collided with the iceberg, which caused the watertight compartments towards the front of the ship to rupture. This then caused the ship's bow to fill with water and caused the ship to sink. Signals for help were only reached until 12:20 a.m., but the Titanic was way too far away for any ships to help them. The ship's lifeboats could only save around 1,178 passengers, which was only around half the amount of passengers on board. However, only 705 people ended up being rescued on lifeboats since the general alarm was not played and many passengers didn't realize the urgency to get off the ship. In the end, the ship fully submerged at 2:20 a.m. on April 15th, and more than 1,500 people died after the ship had sunk. The New York Tribune newspaper on April 16, 1912, had covered the recent tragedy of the Titanic sinking, and at the time this was a shock to the world. A lot of lives were lost from the sinking of the ship, so this historical event had major impact on the survivors and the victims' families. This disaster caused outrage among many people due to the number of things that went wrong, and having a media coverage of this event was very important. This newspaper section was able to cover sections like the number of deaths, survivors, passengers on board, and background on what happened, and images as well. Although the story of the tragedy was not perfect at first, on April 15, 1912, when the ship had sunk, the Vancouver Sun published a newspaper article that gave misinformation to the public. They made a bold statement of no lives lost on the same day that the event had occurred, which simply was not true. Thankfully, other newspapers like the New York Tribune were able to provide correct information just a day later, but this newspaper overall had caused a lot of confusion for many people.